We are the Witchcraft. We are the oldest organisation in the world. When man was first born, we were. We sang the first cradle song. We healed the first wound. We comforted the first terror. We were the guardians against the darkness and the helpers on the left-hand side. We are on the side of man, of life, and of the individual. Therefore, we are against all religion, morality, and government. Therefore, our name is Lucifer. We are on the side of freedom, of love, of joy and laughter, and divine drunkenness. Therefore, our name is Babalon. Sometimes we move openly, sometimes in silence and in secret. Night and day are one to us. Calm and storm, seasons and the cycles of man. All of these things are one, for we are at the roots. Supplicant we stand before the powers of life and death, and are heard of by these powers in the veil. Ours is the secret way, the way of the unknown direction. Ours is the way of the serpent in the underbrush. Our knowledge is in the eyes of goats and women. This is one of the few surviving fragments from the work of Jack Parsons, written in 1950, at the very nativity of modern pagan witchcraft. Yet Jack's writings and ideas are still largely unknown. Our talk today and the talks that have been given in England are partly about putting that right. Our own work in witchcraft and with magic is a continuation very much of the spirit of the work that Jack was engaged with, if not the letter of the work he was doing. To understand the witchcraft that Jack articulated, I want to take us back today to our first real encounter we had with witchcraft when we were children. Our own private and personal worlds of imagination, before contacts, before covens, before any formal initiations, before words, before we never even knew what witchcraft was. To sense that feeling moving through us, that almost involuntary shiver of strangeness and recognition. This is witchcraft. I want us to go back to the first time that we did something.
Sorry, I'm the annoying one.
That's fine.
Oh, one call.
Red Bull the loss.
Yeah, sorry about this. They're very naughty. Fine. You might kick me at the order, but I don't care.
The Witchcraft of Jack is from a time before language, when we first decided to perform a ritual act, a prayer, a spell, something we made up in our own words, in a language before languages. And when we did that something, and it worked. Remembering this, you can begin to get an idea of Jack standing slackly at the background while everyone else is celebrating the nativity of modern pagan witchcraft. Jack's more modern looking than you would expect. In a self-unmatched flare, the self-proclaimed Antichrist is lit and then eclipsed. A name not mentioned in the history of the craft or in the index of Ronald Hutton. For the child of witchcraft, for all the long waiting, he has one whispered word: Babalon. Jack's goddess is the goddess of revelations, the spectacular and oracular goddess of love and sex, come to engulf the world. Not a black or a white, but a red goddess. In Jack's instinctive and passionate example, we can find a way to reconnect with the primal spirit of woman and man as a partnership of equals. We can find our way back to that first wild encounter we had with real witchcraft, And then, when our childhood dreaming was awoken and alchemized by the first stirrings of sexual desire. Once upon a time, it's always a good way to begin the story, Jack was born in Pasadena. Witchcraft is always seeking out the wild places, the edges, the liminal places, the crossroads and the fault lines. And Jack was born on one on October the 2nd, 1914, the date that the Jehovah's Witness movement predicted as the end of the world before they changed the date. Jack enters the story. Jack was raised by a single divorced mother in Pasadena, a place famous for its roses and just swept by the hem of liquor and sex LA, sprawling in all directions from Hollywood to Sherman Oaks. The city of sin, or as the Christians would have it, a modern Babalon. America, when Jack was born, was on the brink of radical change, but was racked by internal contradictions. The sexual revolution had not taken place. LSD was not being distributed by Leary or Kesey or the CIA. There were no Rolling Stones, no Doors, no Led Zeppelin. It was an America of McCarthyism and communist witch hunts. Yet already on the West Coast, more exotic and bohemian ideas were taking hold. The death of Prohibition was celebrated nightly, and the outcasts and artists were drifting in, searching for a new world, a new way to be, and a certain quality of light. In 1914, Crowley had pretty much predicted Jack. In a letter to his student, Frater Achard, he wrote, "The time is just right for a natural religion. People like rites and ceremonies and are tired of hypothetical gods. Insist on the real benefits of the sun and moon, of the father force and the mother force and so on. In short, be the founder of a new pagan cult in the beautiful land which you've made your home." This was a very pivotal time for witchcraft, just as the 60s sexual revolution was with Wicca, 70s feminism was for neo-paganism, and our own impinging global crises are today for us. It was a time for people to reassess and to reconnect. But there was no witch cult for Jack to stumble into. The wood smoke never blew that far from Salem. The native traditions were the victims of genocide or had skipped the border down to Mexico. There were no books, no internet, no friendly magic shops. It was a place far removed from the European witchcraft. So Jack did what any good teenager should, and at the age of 13, he went direct to the source and raised the devil. This first confrontation with the opposer, the black man, the father of fear, the horned god, this antinomian ritual is central to all witchcraft. And for the notes that Jack left of the event, it seems to have worked. Witchcraft exists in the domain of the imagination. It is not something which is found in the overall works of ceremonial magic. It flows from the unconscious, and the unconscious communicates with us and is fed by symbols. It is the language and the logic of the fairy tale. We all have stories which speak to us, which penetrate us to a deeper level, and for Jack, it came from the explosion of the new, lurid science fiction magazines. It was these pulp fictions in amazing stories which inspired at the same time both his witchcraft and his science. For Jack's generation, science fiction was becoming scientific fact. Utopias seemed to be within reach. There was a sense of all possible futures unfolding. things were changing for Jack's generation, and it was clear that man would go to the stars. Science fiction then was a radical genre, and it must be remembered that science fiction is always a pastiche of far older cultural stories, the fairy tales, the pagan memories, the sagas. Just as Arthur C. Clarke famously wrote, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Any sci-fi is a pagan tale. Any flying saucer, an incursion from the land of fairy. Any story can become real. It was sci-fi which enabled Jack to live his starry dreams of the future, and crucially it allowed him to dream in the symbols of his age. Fittingly, it was the friendship with Jack which led Robert Heinlein to famously write Stranger in Strangeland, which many of you may have seen as the film with David Bowie, The Man Who Fell to Earth, which has been widely discussed as Thelema in Code, and rereading it in that light, it certainly seems true. Witchcraft, in essence, is a folk practice, and as such it's one which speaks in the language of its time. A witchcraft born out of science fiction is arguably more authentic than one which is constructed out of library research or the use of studied archaisms. Witchcraft bursts forth from the imagination. The psalm magic, chants and spells can often lack a certain sophistication, but they are still able to touch us deeply. It is this recaptured wonder of childhood and innocence which are essential elements. We could look condescendingly at Jack for using such poor pulp to use his adventures, but others have done the same. Gardner and Crowley with their weekly plotted novels, Hubbard with all of Scientology, Kenneth Grant draping his cult with the horrors of Lovecraft, Chaos Magic raiding the entire dressing up box of pop culture, and modern Wicca growing from Mists of Avalon, Robin of Sherwood, Harry Potter, The Matrix, and now Avatar. The West Coast where Jack was born is still a place of imagination, a place of cultural plunder, a fusion of mishmash and mismatch. And we must expect any modern pagan witchcraft to have these cultural elements, as the dream real estate holdings of Hollywood are now global. But rather than simply accepting the whole mess of cultural junk, we should make a clear difference between the archetypical and the purely ephemeral, between good and bad art. By simply welcoming in everything from our culture as equally valid, we can fall very much prey to our own egos. We can hide in a fairyland while the world around us literally burns. First, I feel we must purge our imaginations to reconnect with our own private secret dreams, as the harder lessons of Grimm's fairy tales are not to be found in the Teletubbies, and the secrets of witchcraft are not to be found exclusively in 40s sci-fi schlock. Even if this is what was helping open the door for Jack, something else was knocking.